Earth was supposed to be a memory. That's how the outer settlements spoke of it when they thought no one important was listening. Not as a place. Places were real. Places demanded proof. But as a symbol. A cradle you outgrow. A home you leave behind. A myth you reshape until it becomes useful. Useful was the key word. In the diaspora, we built usefulness into everything. Into our laws, into our ships, into our prayers. Into the way we taught children to draw a straight line from origin to destiny, without ever looking sideways at what got erased along the way. We told ourselves the cradle had been abandoned. We told ourselves the cradle had fallen into chaos. We told ourselves the cradle needed saving. And because we were human, because we were very good at believing the story that flatters us most, we added the final line. Earth would be grateful. It's easy to understand why the idea spread. The diaspora had turned hardship into religion, and religion into a machine that produced certainty. Certainty is comforting out here, between stars that do not care whether you live or die. Certainty lets you wake up and know what you are for. So, when the Concord of the Outer Faiths convened and announced the first reunification fleet, nobody asked the forbidden question. Nobody asked whether reunion meant consent. They didn't ask because they already knew the answer, and the answer was inconvenient. They called it reunion. 200 war hulls, give or take, formed up in the cold lanes like a moving continent. Carriers and missile barges and battle cruisers, each one packed with hymns and doctrine and enough ordnance to scrape a planet clean of its history. Behind them came the tenders and the tankers, the jammers and the command ships, the floating factories and field hospitals, a traveling civilization of war. People said it would be quick. Earth had no fleet worthy of the name, they said. Earth had too many factions, too many politicians, too many compromises. Even if they tried to resist, they wouldn't coordinate in time. Earth would talk. Earth would plead. Earth would fold. That wasn't intelligence, that was projection. The diaspora had learned to survive by becoming cohesive. We mistook cohesion for superiority. We forgot that cohesion is a tool, not a virtue. And like any tool, it can be used to build or to break. Our admirals spoke with the calm confidence of men who have never seen their assumptions punished. Our priests spoke with the bright hunger of men who wanted to be remembered. Our pilots spoke with the careless bravado of youth, because youth always assumes it will live long enough to regret arrogance. And our technicians, quiet, tired, practical, said very little at all, because technicians are the ones who understand that steel doesn't care about doctrine. Steel only cares about stress and heat and time. When the fleet made the final jump into the Sol Transit corridor, the command deck was full of ceremony. Flags, icons, liturgical recitations piped through the intercom. A reminder that everyone aboard was participating in something historic. One officer described the moment like opening a door in your own house and finding a stranger's furniture on the other side. That feeling of intrusion was the first hint that the story was wrong. But hints are easy to ignore when you're surrounded by people who need the story to be true. Space twisted, light bent. And then the fleet was there. Sol's star burned indifferent, a golden coin in the black. Planets orbited in their quiet loops. A system like any other, except for the third rock. Except for the faint, constant whisper of technology around it, the low hum of radar and comms and orbital traffic that said, "This place is alive." We expected silence. We expected fear. We expected a stunned delay, the kind of delay you get when a world has to argue with itself before it can even decide what words to use. Instead, we got attention. Immediate attention. The first warning wasn't a broadcast. It was the way the system responded to our mass. The number of eyes that turned toward us. The speed at which those eyes synchronized. The way orbital platforms, some of them disguised as civilian infrastructure, some of them positioned like they belonged to an older plan, shifted their orientation without hesitation. On the flagship, a sensor officer frowned and ran the scan again, then again, as if repetition could make the numbers change. "They saw us," she said. An admiral laughed. "Of course they saw us." "No, sir," she replied, and the tone in her voice made the bridge quiet. "They saw us immediately." There is a subtle terror in being observed by a target that was supposed to be unprepared, but terror doesn't thrive in rooms full of certainty. The dread got drowned out by command chatter and hymns and the soft clatter of officers moving between stations. Someone said the words everyone wanted to hear. Cradle defenses are minimal. Minimal was another comforting word. Minimal meant simple. Minimal meant manageable. Minimal meant the story was intact. Then the first Earth transmission arrived. No ceremony, no flourish, no pleading. A calm voice, human, accented in a way that sounded like a world with too many languages and too little patience for ritual. This is Sole Defense Command. Unidentified fleet, state your intentions. The simplest question in the universe. We had expected to be addressed by politicians. We were addressed by soldiers. That should have mattered. It didn't, not yet. The Diaspora flagship answered with a prepared script. Our chief negotiator stepped forward, wrapped in formal insignia, and delivered the message that had been rehearsed for months. Children of Earth, you have been separated from the true line. Your governments have failed you. Your beliefs have fractured you. We come to restore unity and cleanse the falsehoods that have taken root. Submit to correction and rejoin the concord. Your institutions will be dissolved. Your leaders will be removed for review. Resistance will be treated as rebellion against humanity's destiny. It was a beautiful message if you believed the premise. It was also a confession. Earth didn't interrupt. Earth didn't argue the theology. Earth didn't shout. Earth waited until the negotiator finished. Then the same calm voice returned. Negative. A single word. The bridge went still for a heartbeat, the way a room goes still when someone speaks out of turn. The negotiator blinked, almost offended. Earth. The human voice cut him off with a question so blunt it felt like an insult. Are you declaring hostile intent? It was the wrong question for a people who thought they were righteous, because righteous people don't like being described in the language of violence. They prefer euphemism. They prefer sacred framing. We responded with sacred framing. We are fulfilling obligation. We are restoring the cradle. Earth's reply came instantly. Then you are hostile. And there it was. The mask ripped away. No room for interpretation. No room for sermons. The first officer on the flagship leaned in and murmured, "They're trying to bait us." The admiral smiled. "They're trying to buy time." He couldn't imagine a third option. He couldn't imagine that Earth wasn't buying time because it was weak. He couldn't imagine that Earth was buying time because it was loading something. Because the truth is, Earth had already been buying time the moment our emergence flares lit their sensors. Deep under mountains and inside encrypted command bunkers, Earth's chain of command moved like a body reacting to pain, fast, ugly, coordinated. The civilian leadership had questions, of course. Human leaders always do. They demand justification. They demand projections. They demand alternatives, because humans are cursed with imagination and blessed with stubbornness. But imagination only changes the questions you ask, not the problem you face. A fleet of 200 warships does not leave much room for alternatives. Somewhere in a secure facility, a military advisor said what no one wanted to say aloud. If they're here to cleanse us, negotiation is delay, not solution. Another said, if they bring their fighters into orbit, they can bombard at will. A third said, if we hesitate, we die. Then someone asked the question that turned everything into a countdown. Do we authorize it? There was a pause, and in that pause lived the last fragile version of Earth that believed it could stay civilized forever. Then the authorization came down the chain. Yes, code red, full activation. And the message that followed was not for the diaspora. It was for Earth. You don't fire first unless you must. You don't escalate beyond necessity. You protect the planet. But if bombardment begins, stop it, by any means. That line, by any means, is the doorway humans step through when they've been cornered. It's not a threat. It's a description of a state of mind. In orbit, Earth's defensive assets assembled. 6 warships, the diaspora intelligence had said. 6 was laughable. But the way those ships moved was not laughable. They spread wide, not as a proud wedge, but as a net, overlapping fields of fire, angles that forced approach routes, a geometry built not to win, but to make the enemy pay for every meter. Below, Earth launched fighters, fast interceptors, rising in swarms that were too small to match ours, but disciplined, positioned like a lure. And far, far south, under ice that had never been meant to hide machines, something ancient stirred awake, a platform, a relic, a weapon that didn't belong to humans, but had been claimed by them the way humans claim everything useful, with stubbornness and a willingness to accept moral debt later. The polar operators reported the same warning in every language of the military. Platform online, drone stock low. Low meant the same thing it always meant, finite. Low meant you would get one chance to use it right. Earth's commander absorbed the report and did not hesitate. He didn't ask for more drones. He didn't ask for miracles. He asked only for the one thing humans always ask for before they do something terrible: time. So he gave the diaspora 10 minutes. Not because he expected us to leave, because he needed the last 10 minutes of preparation to become lethal, because he needed the population to get underground, because he needed the orbital net to settle into place, because he needed the polar platform to warm, because he needed the world to understand that what came next was not politics, it was survival. The human commander returned to open comms, and the tone in his voice had changed. Still calm, still controlled, but now it carried the weight of authorization. You have entered restricted space. You have 10 minutes to leave the Sol system. Our negotiator tried to speak again. The human commander didn't let him. Any ship remaining after that deadline will be made an example. The words didn't shake. That's what made them dangerous. On our bridge, someone snorted, posturing. Another officer said, "They don't know what they're dealing with." The admiral nodded, satisfied. "They're stalling." He said it like it was victory. He turned to his tactical officer. "Advance the fighter screen. Ready the first missile wave. We demonstrate control, then we deliver the ultimatum again, closer." The tactical officer hesitated just long enough for the admiral to notice. "Speak." The officer swallowed. "Sir, they didn't sound afraid." The admiral's smile sharpened. "Everyone sounds brave until the first ship dies." That's what he believed. That's what the diaspora needed to believe. Because if Earth wasn't afraid, then the whole doctrine unraveled. The whole moral frame of restoring the lost became what it always was beneath the hymns: conquest. The 10-minute countdown continued. Earth's ships held position. Earth's fighters waited like a coiled spring, and the polar platform's reactor signatures climbed steadily, quietly, as if the planet itself was drawing breath. In the final minute, the human commander spoke once more, not to argue, not to plead, but to make the line unmistakable. "This is your last warning." They called it reunion. Earth called it trespass. And as the clock hit 0, Earth fired a single blue-white lance of energy between two of our forward ships. So precise it felt like a blade passing an eyelash without cutting it. A warning shot. A message written in physics. And behind that message, behind the calm voice and the controlled net of 6 ships, something else moved into position. Something small, fast, and very far from civilian eyes. A craft with one purpose: to deliver a package Earth hoped it would never need, because the warning was over, and the next words out of the human commander's mouth weren't for us. They were for his own people. Engage. The first thing that died wasn't a ship. It was the idea that this would be clean. Earth's net tightened as if the word itself had weight. 6 warships shifted their bearings by fractions, small movements that changed firing lanes and made approach routes into funnels. Their fighters didn't surge forward in a heroic charge. They slid outward and upward, spreading into thin, disciplined arcs, positions that looked defensive until you realized what they were doing. They were painting the sky with tripwires. On the Diaspora flagship, the Admiral gave the order that doctrine demanded: fighter screen forward. Intercept anything that leaves orbit. Keep their missiles off our hulls. The fighter wings poured out like a living tide. Vipers and interceptors, call them what you like. Fast, angular silhouettes cutting across the darkness. Hundreds became thousands, and thousands became a thick cloud that any sane missile would die inside. A fleet likes to feel invincible. A fighter screen is how it feels that way. Earth let the screen form. Earth let it come. And then, Earth fired its first true salvo. It wasn't an alpha strike. It wasn't the dramatic all-weapons-free moment everyone imagines when they think of orbital war. It was a measured wave, conventional missiles, and a handful of strategic warheads launched with careful spacing. The Diaspora bridge crew laughed as the missiles hit the fighter picket lines. Interception was immediate. The fighters dove and cut and detonated incoming warheads one by one, turning Earth's first wave into glittering fragments. "That's it?" someone scoffed. "That's all they have?" Earth's tactical officer watched the map and did not flinch when the wave disappeared. He said one word into his headset, the kind of word that only makes sense to people who plan in layers. "Confirmed." On the flagship bridge, an aide reported that Earth's missiles hadn't reached a single capital hull. The admiral smiled. "Then we proceed. Bring the fleet in. We deliver the ultimatum again with their own atmosphere in the background." A priest stepped forward, eager, hungry to speak the words that would sound so righteous on recordings. But the admiral held up a hand. "First," he said, "we break their nerve. Launch the preliminary missile barrage, a show of force." Missile bays opened. Dozens of warheads launched. Hundreds. Not all at once, staggered, layered, designed to test Earth's defenses and force them to reveal their limits. Earth's commander watched the incoming storm on his plot and did not order his ships to retreat. He ordered something that sounded, to an outsider, like cowardice. "All fighters disengage. Bug out." A young pilot on Earth's commnet hesitated. "Bug out? Sir, we can." "Bug out," the commander repeated, and there was steel in it now. "That's an order." Earth's interceptors pulled back hard, peeling away from the oncoming fighter cloud. To the Diaspora pilots, it looked like fear, like a prey animal turning tail. The chase instinct flared, and the Diaspora fighter wings surged forward with joy. It was so predictable, it was painful. Humans have always understood that what you want most is what you can be lured into. Earth launched the second wave. 24 warheads, strategic devices, not aimed at ships, but aimed at the space between ships. The Diaspora fighters began intercept runs immediately. They saw the small number and treated it like a gift. "Our fire teams can handle that," a flight leader reported. "No need to divert the whole wing." He didn't understand what the warheads were for. Earth's tactical officer watched the intercept geometry tighten. Then he gave the command that turned the fighter screen into a target. "Wobble them." It was a subtle change, tiny vector shifts that made the warheads look unstable, wounded, vulnerable. To a pilot chasing glory, it looked like the missiles were panicking. It made the interceptors converge tighter, clustering to guarantee the kill. A cluster is comforting to fighters. A cluster is fatal under the right kind of fire. Earth waited until the Diaspora fighters were packed in the densest possible volume. Then the tactical officer said very softly, "Now." The warheads detonated in near-perfect synchrony. In vacuum, you don't hear a nuclear blast. You see it. The light hits your eyes like a slap. The instruments spike. The sensor net becomes a scream. Dozens of fighters vanished instantly. Hull and pilot converted to plasma. Others cracked apart in merge shockwaves. Many more didn't explode at all. Their avionics simply died. Their cockpits filled with static and warning lights. Their engines stuttered. Their shields collapsed. And then the real effect arrived. Blindness. The Diaspora's shared tactical picture, its targeting solutions, its fused sensor web, the invisible mind that made 1,000 fighters into a coherent swarm, collapsed into electromagnetic chaos. Pilots screamed into comms that no longer carried cleanly. Flight leaders barked orders that turned into garbled fragments. The fighter screen, so confident a second ago, became a loose cloud of terrified individuals. Earth's fighters returned, not rushing, not shouting, killing. They cut through the blinded targets like professionals, dispatching immobile craft with short bursts, ripping wings off the Diaspora swarm while the swarm tried to remember how to see. On the Diaspora flagship bridge, laughter died. A systems officer reported that the fighter casualties were climbing too fast. The admiral's jaw tightened. They used nukes for interference. He said it like an accusation, like Earth had violated a rule. Earth had not violated a rule. Earth had simply refused to play the game the Diaspora expected. The priest on the bridge began a prayer under his breath, not for victory yet, but to steady his own hands. The Admiral forced his voice back into its old certainty. Fine. If the screen is blinded, we push. Capital guns forward. Missile barges release full barrage, drown their net. He turned to communications. Broadcast the ultimatum again. Let them hear what happens when they refuse. The comm officer opened an open channel and began to speak. People of Earth! Earth cut the broadcast with a single line from their commander, cold enough to make the bridge quiet. Keep talking. It won't help you. Then Earth's 6 ships opened fire, not randomly, not in full fury, carefully. A coherent energy beam punched through an escort hull and tore a line through its spine. The ship didn't explode with dramatic fire. It folded, broke apart, and drifted. Another beam struck a missile barge and carved through its launch bays, detonating munitions internally. The barge bloomed in secondary explosions, a chain reaction the diaspora had never imagined an Earth weapon could trigger. Aim for their magazines, Earth's commander said on his private channel, and his voice sounded like someone reading a checklist. Don't waste shots on armor. The diaspora bridge crew stared, stunned, as a smaller force began dismantling the edges of their formation, not winning by raw power, winning by targeting the parts that mattered. The Admiral reacted the way zealots always react when reality fails to respect doctrine. He escalated. Launch the nuclear barrage, he ordered. 200 warheads, staggered. I want their net overwhelmed. Missile bays opened across the armada, and the void filled with launch trails. Warheads fanned out, carefully timed, layered, designed to defeat point defense by sheer volume. Earth's commander watched the incoming storm and spoke to the polar facility. Vault status. A voice answered, strained. Platform ready. Drone stock low. Use them anyway, Earth replied, because that is what humans do when they have to. They use the last resources. They spend what they were saving. They stop planning for tomorrow. The polar platform under the ice fired. A column of drones rose into orbit like a steel geyser, then spread into a pattern so clean it looked like geometry had become hungry. The first wave of diaspora warheads died above the atmosphere in silent flashes as drones intersected their trajectories and erased them. The second wave followed. The third. Earth's point defense and interceptors cleaned up what the drones missed. Earth's ships shifted, absorbing impacts, their shields flickering but holding. The diaspora bridge crew waited for the moment when the net failed. They expected it because they needed it. They expected Earth's defenses to crumble under saturation. Instead, the saturation became another lesson. Earth's net didn't collapse, it flexed. And while it flexed, Earth's ships kept firing, carving at the Armada's support hulls, shredding fighters still blind from the earlier flash. The diaspora admiral's face went pale for the first time. "Why aren't they breaking?" he demanded. No one answered. Because the answer was a question nobody wanted to ask. What kind of world prepares like this? The diaspora had assumed Earth was divided. Earth was behaving like a world that had built protocols for catastrophe. A world that had rehearsed for a day like this. A world that had hidden capabilities behind political noise. And now the noise was gone. They called it reunion. Earth was turning it into triage. On the diaspora flagship, an officer finally said the thing that had been circling everyone's throat. "Sir, they're not panicking." The Admiral snapped. "Of course they're panicking. Their planet is behind them." The officer didn't back down. "No, sir," he said quietly. "They're executing." That was the moment the fleet's mood shifted from certainty to unease. And unease is contagious. It spread through comm channels, through bridge crews, through fighter pilots who couldn't see properly, through captains who were watching escorts die in ways their doctrine hadn't prepared them for. The Armada pushed forward anyway. Because it couldn't do anything else. Because turning back would be admitting failure. Because zealotry, once committed, treats retreat as a worse death than actual death. Earth's commander watched the Armada advance and made his next move. He didn't order a bigger missile volley. He didn't order a charge. He ordered silence. "Reduce emissions," he said. 3 ships dark. 3 of Earth's warships dulled their signatures, flattening their profiles against the black. Not true invisibility. Nothing is truly invisible to a competent sensor net, but the diaspora sensor net was not competent right now. It was wounded, it was blinded, it was full of noise. Earth's dark ships became ghosts. On the Diaspora flagship, a sensor officer shouted, "We lost lock on 3 targets." The Admiral barked, "Find them! Sir, their emissions are! Find them!" Earth's dark ships didn't fire immediately. They repositioned. They slipped into angles the Diaspora wasn't watching. They waited. Then Earth's commander spoke on the open band. Not a sermon, not a threat, a warning, delivered like a man who has already decided what happens next. "To any ship still receiving, disengage. Leave the system. This is your last chance." The Diaspora Admiral snarled and cut the channel. He didn't believe in last chances. He believed in destiny. And destiny, in his mind, required a final act of force. "Bring the carriers forward," he ordered. "Launch the second fighter wave. We crush their net." Earth's commander listened to the carrier signals ramping up, to the new fighter wave preparing to pour out, and he spoke to a single pilot on a secure channel. "Package courier, confirm position," a voice answered. Not excited, not heroic, just steady, ready. "Deliver it." A brief pause, the kind of pause that tells you the pilot has understood exactly what it is. Then, copy. And somewhere behind Earth's net, a small strike craft that the Diaspora had never noticed spooled its drive. Space warped, and the courier vanished into the dark with a payload that Earth had hoped would never leave its locks. The courier craft returned for less than a minute. That's the detail everyone forgets when they imagine superweapons. They picture massive launch bays and ceremonial countdowns and bright banners across hull plating. Earth's most decisive blow arrived like a theft. A ripple in the sensor noise, a brief distortion on the edge of the Diaspora's crippled scan net. Then a small, fast silhouette flickered into existence on the Armada's flank, so far out of position that half the bridge crew dismissed it as a glitch. The craft didn't broadcast, it didn't posture, it didn't dogfight. It did the only thing it had been built to do. It dropped a single payload and vanished again, drive flaring, slipping away before the Armada's second fighter wave could even turn its nose toward it. A lone object remained, tumbling in the void. No engines, no bright signature, just mass, just intent. On the Diaspora flagship, an officer squinted at the falling dot and asked the question that should have been asked with panic. "What is that?" the Admiral snapped. "A decoy." He wanted it to be a decoy. He needed it to be a decoy. Because if it wasn't a decoy, then Earth had just placed something inside the Armada's perimeter, and the Armada's perimeter had failed. Across Earth's command net, the mood shifted, not into triumph, but into the strained quiet of people who are about to push a button they promised themselves they would never push. Earth's commander said, "All ships, clear the volume." No flourish, no speech, just procedure. Earth's fighters peeled away hard, burning outward. Earth's net widened, creating a corridor. The polar platform's drone column tightened and withdrew from the immediate detonation zone, clustering like a fist held close. A junior officer on Earth's flagship hesitated long enough to be human. "Sir, if this goes wrong..." Earth's commander didn't cut him off with anger. He cut him off with truth. "If we don't do it, they bombard." That's the thing people who've never been cornered don't understand about humans. Humans can argue about morals for centuries. But when the corner arrives, the argument becomes a single question: which evil kills fewer people? The tumbling payload drifted closer to the Armada's densest formation, near the line where carriers and missile barges overlapped with escorts, near the thickest cluster of support hulls. The Diaspora's second fighter wave launched anyway, because zealots don't stop to interpret warnings. The fighters surged forward in a desperate attempt to intercept the object, and for a moment, just a moment, it looked like they might reach it. Then Earth's commander spoke one line into his weapons console. "Detonate." The prototype activated, and the word detonation is too small. It wasn't a simple nuclear bloom. It wasn't even an unusually large nuclear bloom. It was a multi-stage release, something engineered with the kind of cynical creativity that happens when smart people are told, "Make the impossible happen, or we die." The first flash was bright enough to blind optical sensors. The second phase was the real horror. A shock front expanded through vacuum like an invisible hammer. A pressure wave translated into something space-time shouldn't have allowed, slamming into fighters and escorts and hull plating with a violence that made metal behave like paper. Ships didn't just burn, they shredded. Fighter clouds vanished in a blink. Escorts cracked apart, structural ribs exposed. A missile barge's launch bays ruptured and spilled ordnance into open space, and the ordnance cooked off in a chain of secondary explosions that looked like a string of stars being born and dying in seconds. The blast radius swallowed tens of thousands of meters and turned the Armada's forward edge into a debris field dense enough to confuse its own survivors. And then the third effect arrived, quiet, cruel, decisive. Blindness. Not the gentle blindness of interference, the violent blindness of sensor collapse. The Armada's tactical picture died. Communications jittered, then failed. Threat maps became meaningless. Ships began broadcasting on open channels because internal command networks were too scrambled to trust. The fleet, which had been a coherent machine a moment ago, became a crowd with missiles, a crowd with reactors, a crowd full of pilots who could not see. Earth had done it again, used nuclear force not primarily to kill, but to steal awareness. The Diaspora Admiral stared at his dead screens and finally sounded frightened. "Get me a picture," he demanded. An officer shouted back, "We can't." "The sensors are." "Then use optics. We can't see through the debris." That's the moment the Armada began to die in earnest, because Earth didn't waste the gap. Earth didn't pause to admire the blast. Earth didn't celebrate. Earth exploited. Earth's commander gave the next order as if it had been waiting in his throat for hours. Alpha strike, now. And suddenly every missile Earth had held back, every warhead they hadn't wasted against an intact fighter screen, ripple fired into the torn wound in the Armada. It was more than 100 strategic warheads, launched in a disciplined wave, not at random but through the corridors the prototype had carved. Missiles that would have been intercepted by a healthy fighter screen now found only scattered survivors. Missiles that would have been jammed by a coherent command net now found chaos. Missiles that would have been spoofed by coordinated decoys now found ships too blind to deploy their defenses properly. They hit, they detonated. They turned crippled carriers into expanding clouds of fire. They turned missile barges into molten confetti. They struck escorts and used those escorts' ruptured reactors as secondary weapons against nearby hulls. And as the Armada tried to reform, tried to reassemble the doctrine machine, Earth's ghost ships struck from darkness. Those 3 emission-reduced warships that had slicked out of the Diaspora's lock earlier now revealed their positions through violence. A coherent energy lance tore through an already wounded cruiser and split it open. Another beam carved into a carrier's hangar pod and detonated its fuel, sending a rolling fire across the deck. The Diaspora bridge crews screamed for point defense solutions they no longer had. Earth's shots didn't need perfect solutions. Earth was shooting at targets that couldn't dodge because they didn't know where the bullets were coming from. It felt unfair. War is not fair. War is only math, and Earth's math was brutal. They called it reunion. Earth had turned it into triage. The Diaspora admirals attempted the only counter they still trusted, saturation. If you can't see the enemy, you drown the volume in fire and hope the universe does the aiming. They ordered every remaining missile ship to launch. Hundreds of warheads poured out of the Armada in staggered waves, timed to overwhelm the little net of 6 ships. The Diaspora bridge crew watched those launch trails and felt the old comfort return for a heartbeat. Numbers. Numbers always felt like safety. Then the warheads hit Earth's net, and Earth survived. You have to understand what that meant. A fleet that can shrug off a nuclear storm is a fleet operating on a different tier of reality. The detonations bloomed around Earth's ships, swallowing them in white fury. For a moment, the Diaspora bridge could not see anything but glare. Then the glare cleared. Earth's ships were still there, scarred, shields flickering. One hull visibly compromised, venting atmosphere, but present, still moving, still firing. A Diaspora officer whispered, almost involuntarily, "How?" No one answered, because the answer was unbearable. Earth was not a soft cradle. Earth was a prepared fortress. Earth had been pretending to be small, and now that pretense was over. The Diaspora admiral did what men like him always do when doctrine collapses. He looked for someone to blame. "Where are our fighters?" A flight coordinator answered with a voice that sounded like smoke. "Dead, dispersed, blind, we can't. Then launch reserves. Sir, the carriers." The sentence didn't finish, because the carrier on their screen had just died, torn open by a follow-up strike, its hangar pods blossoming into fire. The Armada's second fighter wave, meant to be the decisive edge, became debris before it could even form into a screen. Earth had killed the mechanism that made the Armada confident. Then, Earth had killed the Armada's ability to replace that mechanism. It wasn't heroic. It was methodical. That's the part that makes humans frightening when they finally choose to fight. They don't fight for honor. They fight to remove your options. The Diaspora Admiral finally, reluctantly, began to say the word the Crusaders hate more than death. Withdraw. A priest protested, voice sharp with panic. "We can't. The doctrine." The Admiral rounded on him with something that wasn't faith and wasn't gentleness. "Shut up." That single order contained an entire collapse, not just of battle plans, of meaning. Because if the Admiral could tell a priest to shut up, then the crusade was no longer a crusade. It was a war they were losing. "Spool drives," the Admiral snapped. "All ships! Emergency jump!" Break formation if you have to. Breaking formation is the death of cohesion. Breaking formation is the confession that you are no longer a fleet. You are a collection of fleeing hulls. Ships began to vanish in flashes as they tore themselves out of Sol as quickly as damaged systems allowed. Some couldn't jump, some had dead drives, some were too wounded. Some were still trying to launch fighters that would never return. Earth's commander watched the first wave of retreat begin and did not chase immediately. He waited long enough for the Armada to commit to fleeing, long enough for the Diaspora to believe it had found an exit. Then he gave a quiet order to his polar platform. "Deploy the vault. Intercept anything that turns back." The drone column surged again, but thinner now, finite, counted, precious. It moved like a closing gate. A Diaspora battle group, either too proud or too slow, attempted a final bombardment run, turning its missile bays toward Earth in a last act of spite. The drones hit it. They didn't duel, they erased. The battle group shattered, and its missiles died with it, intercepted before they could descend. The remaining Diaspora ships jumped harder, faster, with less order, and for a moment it looked like Sol would be spared further fire. Then, in the chaos of debris and retreat and blinded sensors, a smaller group of Diaspora hulls did something desperate. They charged. Not toward Earth's planet, but toward Earth's net, an attempt to pin the 6 ships and buy time for the fleet's wounded core to escape. A sacrificial run, a death hymn in steel. Earth's commander saw it for what it was, a knife. A knife meant to cut the last threads of Earth's defense. He spoke one line into his comm, and it wasn't a prayer. Kill that group. Earth's beams lanced out, cutting into the charging hulls. Missiles struck. Fighters dove in. The sacrificial ships began to break apart. But sacrifice has weight. One of the charging hulls, already burning, already dead, rammed into an Earthship whose shields were strained from surviving the nuclear storm. Impact. A bloom of fire. A cascade of secondary detonations. An Earth warship tore itself apart in orbit. The Diaspora bridge crews cheered, reflexively, desperately, because they needed any proof that Earth could bleed. But on Earth's command channel, there was no cheer. There was silence. The kind of silence you hear when a human has just watched someone die and has decided the next choice will be colder. Earth's commander spoke again, and the tone had changed. Not rage, not grief, decision, no more. And beneath Earth's southern ice, the relic platform's reactors climbed toward a line they hadn't wanted to cross yet. Because the next phase of defense would decide whether Earth kept the rest of the nukes out of its atmosphere, or whether the war's final cost would be paid on the surface. The Diaspora retreat did not look like victory. It looked like a wounded animal trying to crawl away without showing its belly. Ships jumped in uneven flashes, some clean, some ragged, some leaving behind trails of radiation and debris that would haunt the system for years. A few captains tried to maintain doctrine, even while fleeing. Tight sub-formations, coordinated exit vectors, cover fire from escorts. Doctrine died anyway. Because doctrine requires eyes, and the Armada's eyes were still bleeding, Earth's prototype blast had done more than kill ships. It had rearranged the battlefield into chaos, floating wreckage, shattered hulls, sensor ghosts. It turned a clean retreat into a problem of navigation. A ship can jump blind, yes, but blind jumps are how you lose ships to bad vectors and misaligned drives. That's how you strand crews in empty dark. The Diaspora admirals knew this. They knew a careless retreat would turn defeat into annihilation, so they tried to buy time. They sacrificed a battle group. That charge you saw, those desperate ships ramming into Earth's net, was not courage. It was triage. It was command deciding who dies so the rest can live. That is what crusades become the moment they stop being certain. The ramming ship killed an Earth warship. It tore it open in orbit and turned its crew into drifting ghosts. On Earth's command channel, there was still no shouting, no avenge them, no grand rhetoric, only the sound of a commander making his world smaller. A subordinate reported the status of their net: one ship lost, multiple shield arrays degraded, ammunition low, fighter fuel critical. Another reported the polar platform's drone stock nearly depleted. The commander listened and asked one question: "Vault still online?" A strained voice from the polar facility answered.
"Online, sir, but the reactor's running hot. We don't have much left."
Earth's commander didn't answer with comfort. He answered with instruction.
"Hold until it matters, then spend it."
There is a point in every war where you stop trying to win elegantly and start trying to win at all. Earth reached that point when the cities were still intact and the Armada was still capable of launching more nukes. Because that was the true threat. Not the fleet's pride, not the doctrine, not the sermons. The threat was orbital bombardment. If the Diaspora could put enough warheads into atmosphere, Earth would lose a civilization in an hour. And Earth's commander understood something that Diaspora zealotry had never internalized. A planet is a fragile thing. A planet is not a battleship. A planet cannot tank damage just because you're righteous. You either stop the warheads or you watch the world burn. So when the Diaspora fleet's survivors began to push a last wave of missiles out, some intended as cover fire, some intended as spite, Earth's commander tightened his net and said the most dangerous word in his vocabulary: intercept. The polar vault responded. A thin column of drones rose from the ice like sparks escaping a forge, climbing into orbit in a clean vertical line, then spreading into a pattern that looked like a web being thrown. The drones struck missiles first, because missiles are the only thing in space that can kill a planet without asking permission. They intersected trajectories and detonated warheads high above atmosphere, turning nuclear fire into harmless flashes in vacuum. Harmless to the planet, not harmless to the pilots watching it. The Diaspora ships that hadn't jumped yet saw their cover evaporate. Some captains turned their hulls outward and jumped, abandoning wounded sister ships without a second thought. Others tried to hold formation long enough to recover stragglers. That hesitation got them killed. Earth's beams lanced out and carved into engines and drive housings, not to destroy every ship, but to prevent anything from turning back for one last shot. That was the human pattern: don't waste violence on pride. Spend violence on capability. On the Diaspora flagship, the Admiral screamed for a final barrage. The missile officers reported inconsistent locks, guidance drift, sensor interference, debris saturation. The Admiral snapped, "Fire anyway." So they fired anyway. And because the Armada was blind, many of those warheads did not fly where they were meant to. They drifted through chaos, some detonating prematurely, some vanishing into empty vectors. But a handful kept falling. A handful kept slipping through gaps created not by strategy, but by physics, because the vault was running hot, because drones were finite, because every intercept solution is a calculation, and calculations take time. And time is what nuclear weapons steal from you. Down in the polar facility, an operator shouted that the platform's reactor signature had spiked. Another shouted that the safety systems were screaming. Then the word that kills entire worlds came over the secure line: scram. A reactor. Scram is mercy. It is a machine choosing not to explode. It is also a machine choosing, in that moment, to stop doing its job. The polar vault's output stuttered. The drone column thinned. The interception web developed a brief, fatal gap. The Polar Facility's senior tech said, through clenched teeth, "Power up in 30. Earth's commander answered immediately, "We don't have 30. That sentence is the sound of humans understanding that planning has ended and survival is now a sprint. Earth's remaining ships surged. Fighters dove toward the atmosphere, chasing the remaining inbound warheads like hunters chasing falling meteors. One of Earth's spear ships, closest to the inbound tracks, reduced its main gun output because a full power beam fired into atmosphere is not a weapon. It is a catastrophe. Even now, after losing a ship, after watching the enemy flee, after surviving a nuclear storm, Earth was still trying to keep collateral under control. That's the detail you should remember when you try to decide who the good guys were, because the universe doesn't care about good. The universe cares about what you do. Earth's fighters began shooting down warheads one by one, timed bursts, clean hits. It worked. At first. Several inbound nukes died in bright flashes high above the ocean. A flight leader shouted a count, 2 down, 3 down, 4. Then the count stalled, because distance and time aren't impressed by courage. A warhead falling into atmosphere moves fast enough to make heroism irrelevant. Earth's commander demanded intercept solutions. The sensors were still partly blind from earlier detonations. The debris field was still confusing. The vault was still down. The pilots were doing everything possible, but possible has limits. You can feel those limits in the comm recordings. Voices rising, breath tight, the sound of people working at the edge of what a human brain can process while looking at a weapon that represents a city. Then the Polar Facility came back online. Vault power restored, the operator reported. Drones surged again, but it was too late for the warheads already inside atmosphere. 4 of them made it. 4. Only 4. Orbital war veterans will tell you that 4 is nothing. Planetary survivors will tell you that 4 is everything. On Earth's net, a pilot screamed, "I can't get there in time." Another shouted, "It's too low." Earth's commander did not shout back. He didn't have time. He watched the tracks descend. He watched the last interception window close. And he watched the planet brace for impact like an animal bracing for pain. 4 warheads struck. The first impact registered as a light bloom on the planet's surface, far brighter than any sunrise. The second followed seconds later, then the third, then the fourth. Earth's global sensors recorded everything: atmospheric shock, electromagnetic spikes, seismographic triggers. The world didn't just lose cities, it absorbed trauma. Johannesburg vanished, Venice vanished, St. Petersburg vanished, Hong Kong vanished. The names were reported across comm channels in stunned fragments, as if the officers couldn't believe a place could be erased into past tense. 100 million dead in the immediate flashes, more dying as fires spread and structures collapsed, and radiation washed into wind patterns. Secondary disasters triggered like dominoes, tsunamis born from instant vaporization and the violent return of displaced ocean water. If you're listening to this and thinking, why didn't Earth just surrender? That question is the last refuge of people who haven't been forced into the corner. Surrender doesn't stop a crusade. Surrender validates it. Surrender turns your planet into a trophy and teaches every future zealot that orbital fire is a negotiating tool. Earth understood this, so Earth did not surrender. Earth paid the price instead. And when the price was paid, something changed in the tone of the command channels. Before the impacts, Earth's commander spoke like a man trying to protect the planet while remaining human. After the impact, he spoke like a man who'd watched humanity die in 4 places and decided the enemy would not be allowed to leave without carrying the lesson home. He asked one question: "Do we have main gun power?" A weapons officer replied, voice flat with shock. "Half power, sir," Earth's commander answered with the cold simplicity of procedure. "Target drifting enemy ships. Kill them." There was no celebration, no vengeance speech, just finishing. And that is what made it frightening, because rage burns hot and then dies. Procedure endures. Earth's warships turned their attention to the diaspora hulls still trapped in orbit, ships with damaged drives, ships that had been waiting to jump, ships that had been too slow. They fired. One by one, those ships died. Not because they were the biggest threats, because they were the witnesses who needed to survive long enough to understand they'd been spared earlier by mercy, and mercy was now gone. Somewhere in the retreating diaspora fleet, an officer picked up an open-band transmission from Earth's commander. It was brief, and it wasn't for negotiation. "Remember this, if you come back, there will be no warnings." Then the channel closed. Above Earth, the Vault's drone column dissipated as its remaining stock was finally spent. The planet below burned in 4 places, and the diaspora fleet, what was left of it, jumped away with the first true fear it had ever felt about its own origin. Because the cradle hadn't just survived, the cradle had changed. And the diaspora, whether it admitted it or not, understood that the war had only begun, not in Sol, in the minds of the people who had watched cities vanish and realized restraint is not weakness. Restraint is a lock, and the lock had snapped. The diaspora never showed the 4 impacts on public channels. Not at first. They blurred the feed, they cut away, they spoke in careful euphemisms, unfortunate losses, regrettable collateral, tragic consequences of resistance. They tried to keep the story intact, because the story was the only thing holding their politics together, but you can't hide a wound that big from a species that is still human. You can't hide it from the crews who watched the planet flare. You can't hide it from the technicians who saw the sensor spikes and understood what those spikes meant. You can't hide it from the officers who counted the seconds between gap and impact, and realized that if Earth had been a little slower, if the Vault had been a little weaker, the cradle would have been sterilized. And you can't hide it from the part of the diaspora that still had family on Earth, because the diaspora was never as cleanly separated as the doctrine pretended. There were always messages, always stolen calls, always whispered channels, always people who remembered that the 13th tribe wasn't a concept. It was a world full of living humans. The day after the retreat, the Concord convened an emergency session and tried to decide which version of reality they were going to inhabit. The priests wanted the old one, the one where righteousness turned mistakes into proof, the one where any failure could be blamed on insufficient faith. The admirals didn't argue theology, they argued math, they argued tonnage, they argued casualty ratios. They argued the unthinkable fact that Earth's fleet, small, outnumbered, supposedly fractured, had executed a layered defensive plan that shredded a fighter screen, blinded a command net, survived a nuclear storm, and then punished a retreat with precision. And the admiral said the sentence that broke the room: "We can't win this." A priest slammed his palm on the table and demanded to know how a cradle world could be stronger than a diaspora empire that had built war into its culture. A technician, brought in as an unglamorous witness, answered before anyone could stop him. "They weren't stronger," he said, and when every eye turned toward him, he swallowed and continued anyway. "They were ready. Ready. Ready." That word hit the room like a second defeat, because ready implies intention, ready implies preparation, ready implies a truth. The doctrine had worked very hard to deny. Earth hadn't avoided large-scale war because it was incapable. Earth had avoided war because it had been trying not to become something again. Then the diaspora came and forced the lock open. In the weeks that followed, the fleet's survivors brought back fragments of recordings, partial sensor logs, damaged comm transcripts. They were inconsistent, full of gaps, corrupted by flash events and debris noise. But some details repeated too often to be dismissed. The 10-minute countdown, the warning shot, the fighter screen's sudden blindness. The word, bug out, spoken in Earth's command traffic with an urgency that didn't sound like fear. And the prototype. The prototype was the hardest thing to talk about in the Concord chamber because it was the clearest proof that Earth had been holding something back. Earth had built a device so destructive and so uncertain that their own commander treated it like a last resort. That meant Earth's engineers had drawn a line. That meant Earth had morals even in war. That meant the diaspora's sermon that Earth had fallen into chaos was a lie. Or worse, it meant Earth had fallen once and climbed back out with scars and locks and contingency plans. The priests tried to reclaim the narrative. They said Earth had defiled itself with alien technology. They said Earth had betrayed humanity by surviving. They said the 4 impacts were proof that the cradle needed correction. But the admirals, those who had stared into the dead eyes of their sensor screens while their ships died, no longer had patience for proof. They had fear. And fear makes humans honest in a way pride never does. An officer from the retreating flagship, an old warhorse with a voice like ground metal, stood before the chamber and spoke without poetry. We gave them a deadline. They warned us. We stayed. They fought. We threw nukes. They survived. We ran. Some of our warheads got through anyway. He paused, and when he spoke again, the room felt colder. And then they stopped being restrained. The priesthood demanded retaliation. The admirals demanded time to rebuild the fleet, time to reinforce the outer depots, time to move the civilians, time to prepare defenses in case Earth did what humans do when they learn a new kind of threat exists. Because Earth had just been taught something every war teaches the survivors, the universe is not gentle. If you want peace, you have to make it expensive to take from you. Earth had already made it expensive. Now, Earth had been given a reason to make it prohibitive. They called it reunion. The Concorde began evacuations. Not publicly, not with open admission. The doctrine couldn't survive the words, "We are afraid," so they dressed it up in prudence. Strategic relocation, cultural preservation, defensive dispersal. But it was evacuation. Because the people running the numbers were no longer calculating how to subdue Earth. They were calculating how to survive what Earth might do next. The problem for the diaspora was that it still thought in the language of armies. It thought retaliation would look like another fleet. It thought reprisal would look like a counter-invasion. It thought humans would play the same game, bring mass, bring doctrine, bring overwhelming force. That is not how Earth fought. Earth fought like an organism that had finally recognized a predator. It went for the predator's teeth. It went for the predator's food. It went for the predator's ability to come back. The first Earth strike did not announce itself with a broadcast. It arrived like a quiet hand closing around a throat. A shipyard on the edge of diaspora space, one of the yards designated to begin rebuilding carrier hulls, went dark without warning. Comms cut first, then sensors. Then the yard's own defense grid, as if something inside it had simply decided to stop obeying. By the time the yard's emergency beacons screamed into the void, it was already too late. Warheads hit the slipways and turned half-built hulls into scrap. Fires bloomed in storage modules. Fuel depots cooked off in chain explosions that shook the station's spine. The defensive satellites fired blindly at nothing because the enemy had already moved. When the surviving yard personnel finally got a visual, they saw a silhouette sliding away from the wreckage. Small, fast, not a battleship, not a carrier, but something built for one purpose: to sever arteries. The message Earth left behind was not a threat, not a sermon, not a demand for surrender. It was a fact. We can reach you. That line spread through the diaspora like infection. It changed everything, because it wasn't a claim of power. It was demonstration of power. And demonstration is what humans understand best. You can tell humans you're dangerous. Humans will argue. You can show humans you're dangerous. Humans will plan. The Concorde, in panic, attempted to rally its remaining fleets and fortify the inner worlds. It put more ships on patrol. It ordered tighter communication discipline. It imposed curfews in stations that had never seen curfews. It didn't matter. Earth didn't need to fight fleets to win. Earth needed to make fleets unsustainable, and that's when the diaspora began to truly understand the kind of enemy it had created. Not an enemy that fought for pride, an enemy that fought for prevention, not an enemy that wanted to conquer your worlds, an enemy that wanted to make sure you could never threaten theirs again. A young priest, still clinging to doctrine like a flotation device, asked a senior admiral why Earth would do this. Why Earth would strike shipyards instead of simply forgiving the diaspora after victory. The admiral stared at him like he'd asked why gravity existed. "Because if they forgive us," he said, "we come back." The priest protested. "We wouldn't." The admiral cut him off with a laugh that contained no joy. "We already did." Silence fell. That silence was the sound of the diaspora finally hearing itself. And in that silence, something else emerged, the recognition that Earth's 10-minute deadline had not been arrogance, it had been mercy. It had been Earth trying, one last time, to avoid becoming the kind of civilization that builds prototypes it hopes it never uses. It had been Earth trying not to reopen the old door in human history. The diaspora had kicked the door down anyway, and now the thing behind the door was loose. Here is the part people hate, because it feels like condemnation. But it isn't condemnation, it's description. They came with numbers. They came with doctrine. They came with faith. They came with certainty. They came with fire. And Earth answered each one the way humans answer when forced. Earth answered numbers with timing. Earth answered doctrine with improvisation. Earth answered faith with procedure. Earth answered certainty with evidence. Earth answered fire with endurance. That is the anaphora of humanity when cornered. Not because humans are saints, because humans are survivors. The diaspora's greatest mistake wasn't underestimating Earth's weapons. It was misunderstanding Earth's restraint. Earth negotiated for years because negotiation is cheaper than war. Earth compromised because compromise keeps your children alive. Earth argued with itself because argument is what humans do when they're trying to avoid spilling blood. We mistook all of that for softness. Then we arrived and burned cities, and we discovered the truth. Restraint is not weakness. Restraint is a choice made by something that could do worse. The 4 impacts changed Earth's internal politics overnight. Before the war, Earth's leaders could argue about budgets and jurisdiction and secrecy. They could pretend that the military assets in orbit were contingency instead of necessity. They could keep the locks on the cage and hope the cage would never be needed. After the impacts, the locks weren't political anymore. They were emotional. A planet that loses 4 cities in a day doesn't debate whether to fund defenses. A planet that watches nuclear fire on its own soil doesn't debate whether to trust the people who did it. Earth's political factions became, for once, aligned. Not through ideology, through memory. In a closed session, an Earth leader was recorded saying something that never made it to public channels, but spread anyway, because humans are terrible at keeping secrets when grief is loud. We tried peace. They answered with doctrine and nukes. We won anyway. Now we make sure it can't happen again. That is not vengeance. That is deterrence born in trauma. It is ugly. It is human. It is effective. The diaspora began to fracture, not because Earth attacked its ideology directly, because Earth attacked its infrastructure. Because infrastructure is what makes ideology credible. A priest can shout about destiny forever. A priest cannot build a carrier. A fleet is what gives sermons weight. Earth took the fleet away, piece by piece, and as the fleet shrank, the sermons sounded like what they had always been beneath the hymns. A story the diaspora told itself to feel righteous. Righteous doesn't win wars. Capability wins wars. The Concord tried to sue for terms. It sent envoys with cautious language, with mutual recognition, with offers of ceasefire. It tried to reclaim diplomacy, suddenly, as if diplomacy had not been the thing it mocked in the cradle. Earth didn't answer those envoys with immediate destruction. Earth answered them with silence. And that silence was not indifference. It was judgment. Because Earth had learned, again, the oldest lesson in its own history. Words mean nothing if you can't trust the hands that speak them. Eventually, months later, when enough shipyards were crippled and enough depots burned and enough patrol routes went dark, Earth sent one reply. It was a simple transmission, open band, no ceremony. You don't get to call it reunion. That line did more damage to the Concorde than any missile strike, because it named the lie. It stripped the euphemism away. It forced the diaspora to face what it had tried to hide from itself. It was not reunion. It was invasion. And invasions have costs. Earth did not demand the diaspora's extermination. Earth did not demand conquest. Earth demanded one thing: the end of capability to repeat the act. Dismantlement of certain shipyards, limits on certain technologies, permanent monitoring of certain transit corridors. In other words, containment. A cage. The diaspora, in a moment of bitter irony, was being offered the same kind of lock it had assumed Earth was too weak to maintain. And in that moment, some of the diaspora finally understood the full shape of the cradle's power. Earth could have killed them. Earth chose not to, not because Earth was merciful by nature, because Earth was strategic by necessity. A dead enemy can become a martyr. A contained enemy becomes a warning. Humans have always understood the utility of warnings. The survivors of Earth's 4 cities did not feel peace when the ceasefire finally stabilized. They felt exhaustion. They felt grief. They felt a quiet anger that would take generations to cool. But they also felt something the diaspora hadn't expected. They felt unity. Not the unity of doctrine, the unity of shared memory. A planet that has been burned remembers together, and that memory becomes policy, that memory becomes infrastructure, that memory becomes the reason Earth's future commanders would never again need to offer 10 minutes. Because the next time a fleet appeared at the edge of Sol, Earth wouldn't warn, Earth would act. That is the final reframe, the verdict that locks the opening belief into place. Earth was supposed to fold. It didn't. Because Earth's peace was never weakness. Earth's peace was restraint. And restraint is what a dangerous species practices when it is trying, desperately, not to become the worst version of itself. The diaspora forced Earth to become that version anyway. They called it reunion. History calls it something simpler. A reminder. A reminder that humans avoid war not because they can't fight. Humans avoid war because once they start, once the locks break and the cage opens, humans are terrifyingly good at finishing.